Well, in this video, I'm going to talk about preparing the blank a little bit and also cutting out the back view, this view here of the owl. When we sell and cut out most of our songbird and owl blanks that we sell look like this. They're profile cut, but they're not back cut. For the purpose of this class, if you've watched the videos, you'll see a blank that looks like this that is also back cut. I'll be doing a separate video on how to get to this on the bandsaw, but for most people, cutting this side profile here on the bandsaw is not necessarily a practical thing. We'll talk about that in a different video. So most of the time, when I start with a blank in a class or at home, I'll start with a blank that looks like this, and I need to get from this to this. And it's quite important for me to maintain a square corner here. Like I cut straight in on the bandsaw here. And whether I'm carving this or doing it on the bandsaw, I want to cut straight down so that I have a sharp corner here along all these edges. This gives me a reference point so that when I'm wanting to use my pattern to mark things in, I've got a corner here that I can measure from, whatever view we have. And then as we get into the carving, we tend to round things off. You round things off only when you get to a point where you need to round them off. So how do I get this back view drawn onto the bird here? Well, the way I typically do it is I use my pattern. I'll take a copy of the pattern here, and there's a couple of really important lines that you want to be aware of. One of them is what I'll call a vertical reference line. And on all of my patterns, I have some sort of a reference where the line is vertical. And this vertical line ideally runs through the widest point of the bird, which is going to be on most birds, the widest point of the bird is going to be the part that's directly over where the most of the weight of the bird sits, like where it balances. So roughly, and that's going to be the widest point of the bird, roughly here is where the vertical reference line would be on this pattern. So if you bought a pattern and it doesn't have a vertical reference line on it, and I think this actually might be the only pattern that I produce of my own that doesn't actually have a vertical reference line drawn in it. So what I would do is I would go to the vertical, or go to this, and roughly here, just draw a line on the pattern that would be a vertical line. So it would be plumb. If the bird's sitting in its natural position, this line will be plumb. It'll be a vertical line. And this is a reference line that you can use for balancing the bird when you're mounting it on a base, or it's got all kinds of uses and all kinds of applications. And it's an important line to keep in mind, but it usually represents the widest point of the bird and a plumb line. So that's kind of an important thing. Once you've got that drawn on your pattern, what you can do then is you can take your blank and lay it right on the pattern. Line it up right on the pattern. You cut it out. And you can see I've got the line coming down here and coming out the top. If I lay the bird on the pattern here and mark in where the vertical reference line comes on the one side, I can mark it in on the other side here like that. So I've got it marked in on my blank. I quite often will just take a little ruler like this, some kind of a straight edge that's square on the bottom. Same thing. I've got that little line that I've marked in there. Draw that in. This will allow me to draw my there we go. This will allow me to draw my vertical reference line in. See what I've got here. Line up these two lines here and draw the vertical reference line in on both sides of the bird. A little trickier getting this lined up when I'm trying to do it on a camera. Normally I would just, set it down on the table like this. I guess you can see this okay. You get the idea. Just line up where the marks are. Now I've got that vertical reference line around. You can set your carving up here, set it on your pattern, and just make sure that that line, you can double check and make sure the line lines up. So that's a plumb line. It's a very important line to keep in mind. It's a plumb line on your carving, and it's something that's worth reference. Now, this is your vertical line. In the case of this particular pattern, one of the reasons why I don't have a vertical reference line is because, if I was using this vertical reference line, this is the view that I would have to cut out. So this is the way the bird looks when you're looking at it directly from above, sighting down the vertical reference line. If you made this line perfectly at right angles to your paper, your pattern, the back of the tail would line up with this and the front of the head would line up with that, and that's what you see. When the bird is rounded out, effectively, you see that's what you've got. You see what's on that top view. But this is, because it's such a tall top view, it's not as practical as going onto the back here when you're looking straight down the back this way. So the other reference that you've got on your pattern in this particular case is taking the widest point of the bird, which is here, give or take, but that's roughly the widest point of the bird. And then draw a line straight across. Ideally, you want this line to be at right angles to this vertical line for the eye and the vertical reference line. So you draw a line straight across through the whole pattern, like that. Draw across like that. And now you'll set this blank on the pattern. Same thing that we did before. It's kind of funny how sometimes when you're doing lines like this, they aren't always where you expect them to be. That's why it's so important to be measuring things. Now, in this particular case, this line is probably a little bit more important than the vertical reference line for what we're going to be doing here. This is your more important line. Now, when I cut out this blank, I traced my side view onto a piece of wood. In this case, I'm using a piece of Tupelo. I trace this onto a piece of wood, or sometimes I'll take the whole pattern and just kind of cut this out roughly and use a glue stick and just glue it onto the piece of wood. And then when I'm finished, make sure the wood is thicker than I need it to be. You can measure how wide the piece needs to be, directly off the pattern. You measure that width, make sure your wood is at least that thick when you're cutting. And if it's a little thicker, then you cut out the profile like this. And then after you're done cutting out the profile, you trim it to the right width. And sometimes you end up with a little leftover piece like this. And this is what I use now because I cut out a lot of these blanks. I'll take this piece and just lay it on a piece of wood like that and trace around it with a pencil to give me my outline. Then I cut that out on the bandsaw. So now what I need to do is I need to get this next cutout done here. It's to do it on a bandsaw requires quite a bit of setup, and it can be a dangerous cut if you're not experiencing working with a bandsaw. Again, we'll cover that in a future video. But so what you need to do here is you need to get your sighting down this line. Like if you're looking down this line, so this line is going directly away from you. You know, like you can see this line is going directly away from me now. At that view, that's what you want this side to look like. And if you're cutting this on the bandsaw, you need to make sure that this line is plumb when it's going through the bandsaw. And you can see that really isn't going to be practical to do. So for most birds, what we do is we just carve it this way. So here's where we go. I'll take this pattern now, and we'll take some of the common features on the pattern. Like we'll go with and you can go from anywhere, like right in here. I'm going to make a mark at where the lowest narrow point of the front of the bill is. I'm going to make another mark at the top of the bill here. I've already got one at the widest point. Then I'll maybe pick the rear of this feather group here, the rear of these coverts, the rear of the tertials, and the wingtip automatically is lined up with. So I've taken some basic points here, and I'm going to use my ruler to go straight across. I want this line parallel to the line that I've put in. You know, these lines should all be parallel to each other. So what I want to do is I want to mark these across. And I could even go like where the wingtip is here. Mark that across, because now this is going to help me draw I'll do the 2 on the head here. This is going to help me draw my back view. I'll show you how that works. You have these lines going across here. There. So what I do now is I start, and some people, if you're not quite terribly accustomed to doing this, some people will number these. Just to make it a little easier to keep track of them, because you can get confused with some of these things if you're not careful. Now, the other line that I haven't talked about yet is this center line. And on every bird carving, this is one of the most important lines that you're going to have on the carving. This is a line that goes all the way around the entire blank. And this would represent the widest, or the point on the bird that forms a silhouette on the bird. So the theory behind this is now you don't ever cut through this center line. This is the roundest point, the highest point, the roundest point on the bird is this center line. And you make sure you don't ever cut through that center line. When you're finished carving your bird, before you sand it, that center line should basically still be intact. Like you can see portions of it that are still showing on the carving that's already done here. So you never cut through that center line. Well, I shouldn't say never. If you do cut through it, you do it deliberately, and there would be another line outside it somewhere to replace it. But you don't cut through the center line is a good rule of thumb. And to get that center line drawn in, there's several ways of doing it. One is you can just use a caliper like this, measure how wide the blank is. In this case, I've got a metric caliper, but you can do the same thing with a inches caliper. I've got about 81 millimeters. So if I set this to about 40, just a hair over 40, 40 and a half, if I want to be real precise, then I can take this caliper and I can just put it down here, and I can put marks at various points throughout the bird. And then there's a technique that a lot of cabinet makers use where you can line up the pencil here, put your finger on the edge, I won't do it on the center line. I'll show you. And you could draw a line by running your finger down the edge here. It takes a little practice, but you can do that for drawing a center line in. The other one you can do is just to take a flexible ruler like this. Once you've got all your measurements, and just mark every so often that 40.5 millimeters, mark. And you can take a ruler, a flexible little plastic ruler or plastic strip, and just draw it that way. That's the other option. The other thing, and I'm not sure if you find any of these online, there's a group, the Winnipeg Carving Club, publishes a book of patterns and things like that. And in that pattern book, they have a little patterns and plans for this little, they call it a center marking device. And it's really handy because, you set it up like this, get the pencil set up there. That's what I use to set up the center line on all the blanks that I cut for the class, because it just does a phenomenal job. And these are adjustable. You can adjust all kinds of different angles on them and tighten things up and so forth to get them wherever you need them to be. It's a real handy little device. We do have those books available on our website, Prairie Canada Carvers Pattern Book. And there's a copy of that in there, in that pattern book. It's also got some really great patterns for some birds and animals and things too. So anyway, once you got your center line drawn in, you got this line drawn in, vertical reference line drawn in. Now what you want to do is take this pattern here, and I guess what I should have done is I should have extended these lines all the way across. That was my mistake not doing that. There we go. So now these lines are going right across both sides of the pattern. So now if I lay my blank on my pattern, line up this reference line here, which is line number 3, like that, get it lined up. I mark in all these other lines. And the wingtip line is already there, obviously. Where that wingtip is. And if you find it helpful, don't be afraid to put a number on each of these, just so you can identify which line matches which here. So once you've done that, you've got these in here. Now what you want to do is you want to extend that line up all the way across. So I've drawn the rest of those lines in now. I've got them. So now if I was to set this on line 3, if I line this up here with this line 3 and make this line plumb, like this, then these lines here will now line up with the others. And I don't need to worry about where they go on the face or on the backside here. All I really need to do is look here. And this is where I now take, if you're working with a symmetrical pattern, you could just measure how wide it is overall, like this. You measure on line 4 how wide it is at line 4, and then you can go into line 4 and put this down here and mark in, where you need to be. But I recommend on this particular one doing each side different, because if you were just measure the overall width on line 1 here, as an example, it says that it's about 73 millimeters wide. And so 73, half of that is going to be about 36 and a half, 36 millimeters. If I measure from the center line to the front here, I've got 37 millimeters. And if I measure from the center line to the back, you can see I've got about 36 millimeters. So they're very, very close. But it's 37 millimeters from on line 1 to the front of the head. So I'll set this at 37 millimeters. Line that up and put a little mark there. And then I'll go to 36 millimeters and put a little mark at the back here. So now what I've done in putting these marks in is I've marked in this point and this point right here. Now, if I wanted to, I could, draw another line through here, measure those points, and I can put as many lines on this pattern as I want. Because the back view and the front view are lined up with each other. These features all line up. It was drawn specifically that way. When I drew the pattern, and then I drew the back view so the back view would line up with the side. Sometimes if you buy a pattern, there's some older patterns that have been published where if you try drawing a line from the back of these culverts in here up to the back, they won't line up. The views don't line up. And then you've got a bit of a whole other problem. But on my patterns, most of the patterns that we carry, the views will line up quite well. So I just carry on and I go down on the second, on line 2, I've got about 36 millimeters to the front. And 36 millimeters to the back. Three is going to be the full width of the bird, so I don't have to measure line 3. Line 4, I've got about 37.5 millimeters. So and the actual measurement doesn't really matter all that much because I'm just using the caliper to as a spacer. So you can see now on line 4, there's definitely a difference between how much space there is from line 4 to the end. So if you were to use this as an even, like just measure the overall width and center it, you wouldn't be consistent with what's on the pattern. And same with in line 5. Go. Line 6. And on the wingtip, at the end of the wingtip, the wings come to a point basically, but then I want to know how wide the tail is at each of those points. So on the left side of the tail, so now I'll mark this down on the left side of the tail, and then finally on the right side of the tail along this line. So they're little different measurements. So now you see what I've got on here. I've got all these drawn in. The very top of the head, if I'm going parallel to this line here, when I go up to the top of the head is going to be right up about here. That's where the top of the head is. So when I draw this top view, of the head here, what you see on the top is going to be starting up here on the blank. And then I'll just lift this up a little bit. So now what you do is you're basically drawing a connect the dots, and you're drawing this pattern here. You're drawing this view onto your bird, and you connect the dots. You start at the top here, and you want to see where, I'll just maybe change this over here to the view that we can see. this line one, see the line comes up straight and just curves around to the center here. So I just take that and draw in a curve coming down to that line. That's what I end up with. And at that line, then I need to bring the bill out a little bit, draw that in, and then I come down to this line too. So you can see what I've drawn in there. Same thing on the back. I start here and just draw a nice curved line. It looks a little weird when you look at it from the top. It looks a little pointed, but when you look at it from the front here, you see it actually looks nice and round. That's the whole idea, is you want to make this look round when you look at it from this direction here. You see that. So the rest of it is just, it's a matter of looking at, okay, line 2 here is just a little bit above line 2. It just gets a little narrower. And then at line 2 goes through there. Line 3 is the full width of the bird. You come from here down to line 3. You're using the entire width of the bird. And then from there is just basically connect the dots. So we've got that drawn in now. This line will continue on until it at that same angle. Like you see the angle is there, that same angle carries on to get to the end of the wingtips. If you want, you could measure where that point is and where that point is in the, you could take your caliper and measure those little points and you could put them in there. I find that if I just carry on this curve here until it's a bit of a curve. It's not a straight line. It's got a bit of a sweeping curve to it. But if I carry on that curve like that, then I end up with the view for the wingtips. And then the other thing that may not be a bad idea to do is just to measure, this little bit in here and see how far just how wide it is at the base of the tail that's showing. You'll also notice that the wings are shifted. The bird has his wings shifted over to the left here, so you got more of the tail showing on the right-hand side. And that's just the way the pattern's drawn. It's not that the birds always do that or anything, but if I go maybe a half an inch away from this line here, that should be where the base of the tail is, right in there. And now I can draw in that. I'll just draw in the tail as a kind of a straight little shape here. So I've got the location and width of the tail laid out there. And then I just usually look at it visually and just do a little bit of a rounding on the back end of the tail. Make sure I've got that roundness there. So now this is what I've done. I've drawn in the back view here. In theory, I could put this on a bandsaw with this plumb line here, and I could cut these shapes out on the bandsaw. And in fact, that's kind of what I've done here. But in order to do that safely and accurately, I had to build a jig in order to make it so that I could run this safely and accurately through the bandsaw. So what we're going to do in a little bit here is I'm going to go through the process of how I rough this out with a Fordham tool, or you could use a knife and a gouge. You could use a variety of different tools. The important thing isn't so much what kind of tool you use as much as it is what the thing looks like when you're done. And effectively, this is what you're after when you finish this step. But we're going to do this without a bandsaw.